Welcome back to HOA Backfired. The fence was not the problem, the HOA was. Karen shoved a stop work notice in my face and screamed that I was not allowed to even hold a drill without board approval. You missed the deadline and now you get the consequences. I stood in my side yard with a tape measure clipped to my belt and a post hole digger leaning against the fence line, staring at her as she waved the paper like it was a warrant. The notice was on the Cottages at Willow Glen HOA Incorporated letterhead, laminated and pristine, and she held it between us like a shield. I work nights as a paramedic in Salt Lake City, and I have seen people lose their minds under pressure, but this was a new level of petty. Diane Jackson, vendor coordinator for the HOA, had been circling my property for 2 weeks ever since I submitted my fence application. The Cottages at Willow Glen is one of those neighborhoods where certain homes get special treatment and everyone knows it. Diane had a reputation for threatening contractors and service techs, and she used public shaming and theatrics at meetings to intimidate anyone who questions her. I had ignored the whispers until she targeted me. The trigger was a fence setback marker, a simple orange stake with flagging tape I had placed to mark the property line. She called it a hazard and demanded I remove it immediately. I refused. That was my first mistake, or maybe my first smart move. She stepped closer, boots squelching in the wet grass. I will make an example out of you so everyone learns. Her voice was steady, cold, practiced. She had said that line before. I could see it in the way she held her phone on speaker, screen turned away from me, recording everything. The phone was her compliance prop, her insurance, her little power move. I did not flinch. I had my own insurance. A clipboard with color-coded sticky notes labeled by dates sat on the patio table behind me, logs of every interaction, every email, every meeting minute I had pulled from the HOA portal. I was building a case, and she had no idea. My kid brother was visiting from out of state, leaving in the morning, and Diane was trying to tow his car tonight because it was parked in my driveway instead of the guest lot. That was the time pressure. That was the lever she thought she could use to make me fold. She thought I would panic, pull the stakes, apologize, beg for an extension. Instead, I stared at the violation letter in her hand and smiled, because it proved exactly what I suspected. The letter referenced a fence guideline that was never voted into the covenants. I had checked. My friend who works in IT had verified the metadata and timestamps on the HOA portal documents. The guideline she was citing did not exist in any legally binding form. Diane kept talking. Your camera does not matter, my minutes are the truth. That was her boomerang line. The thing she said to shut down anyone who tried to document her behavior. She had said it at the last board meeting when a homeowner tried to play a recording of her threatening to ban them from the pool. The board had backed her then, nodding along, pretending her version was gospel. But I had the minutes, and I had quorum logs, and I had a recording where she admitted it was personal and she wanted to make an example of me. That was my trump card. I was not going to reveal it yet. I needed her to escalate. I needed her to do something so overreaching that even the board could not ignore it. She handed me the stop work notice and turned to leave, but not before she pointed at the survey stakes. Those are coming out tonight, or I am calling code enforcement. I did not respond. I let her walk away, phone still held high, recording her victory. A gate technician with a tool bag was walking up the side path, pausing mid-stride to watch the confrontation. He looked at me, looked at her, and shook his head. Man, she is always like this. I nodded. I know. He asked if I needed a witness statement. I told him I might, and I took his number. That was my first ally in the field, someone who had seen her in action and was tired of it. The next morning, I walked my brother to his car and found an orange envelope tucked under the wiper blade. It was a certified letter demanding fees and pretending the fence guideline is law. The letter was from Diane, not the board, but it carried the HOA logo and a threat to place a lien on my property if I did not pay $300 in application review fees by the end of the week. I had already paid the application fee. This was a second invented charge, a punishment disguised as procedure. I took a photo of the envelope, the letter, and the timestamp on my phone. I texted my IT friend. He replied within an hour. The board never approved this fee structure. It is not in the budget. Diane is freelancing. I went to work that night, ran calls, kept people alive, and came home to find my survey stakes pulled out of the ground and tossed into the flower bed. Someone had tampered with them, and Diane was already blaming me for the damage. She had sent an email to the entire board accusing me of creating a safety hazard by leaving unmarked stakes in the yard where children could trip. There were no children in my yard. There were no children within 50 feet of my property line. But the email went out to every board member, every committee chair, and half the neighborhood. My phone started buzzing with texts, neighbors asking what was going on, neighbors saying they had heard I was causing trouble, neighbors saying Diane had told them I was refusing to follow the rules. I replied to the email. I attached photos of the stakes in their original positions, time-stamped from the day before. I attached the survey report from the licensed surveyor I had hired to confirm the property line. I attached the original fence application I had submitted, which included a site plan showing the exact placement of the stakes. I copied the entire board, the management company, and the HOA attorney. Then I waited. The response came within 2 hours. Diane sent another email, this time attempting to ban me from amenities entirely as punishment for questioning her. She claimed I had violated the community conduct policy by sending a hostile email to the board. The conduct policy required homeowners to address concerns through the proper channels, which apparently did not include replying to a mass email with documentation. I called the management company. The woman who answered sounded tired. She had heard this story before. She told me Diane had a habit of escalating conflicts beyond the board's authority, and the board rarely pushed back because she controlled the vendor contracts. If you cross her, your landscaper stops showing up. Your pest control gets delayed. Your gate remote stops working. She runs the vendors, and the vendors run the neighborhood. I asked if there was anything I could do. She said I could request a hearing, but Diane would run the hearing, and the outcome was predictable. Or I could wait for the next board election and hope someone challenged her. That was 6 months away. I did not have 6 months. I had a fence project that was already delayed, a brother whose car was still under threat, and a neighborhood that was starting to believe I was the problem. I needed to move faster. I started pulling records. Every meeting minute from the past 2 years. Every budget line item. Every vendor contract. I stayed up all night, cross-referencing payments and approvals, looking for the pattern. My IT friend helped me sort the data. We found it around 3 in the morning. Diane had been approving vendor invoices without board vote, funneling extra work to the same 3 companies, and pocketing referral fees that were never disclosed. The budget review I had requested 6 weeks ago, the one the board had ignored, would have revealed vendor favoritism. That was my payback vector. I emailed the proof to every homeowner in the neighborhood right before the next board meeting. The email included a summary of the vendor payments, a comparison to market rates, and a timeline of Diane's threats against homeowners who had questioned her. I did not editorialize. I did not call her names. I just presented the numbers and the dates and let the community draw their own conclusions. The email went out at 6 in the morning. By 8, my phone was ringing. Neighbors I had never met were calling to ask if the numbers were real. Neighbors who had been fined were asking if they could join a group complaint. Neighbors who worked in finance were offering to audit the books. The board meeting was that night. I showed up early and sat in the front row. Diane walked in with her clipboard, phone on speaker, and the same laminated policy sheet she had waved at me in the yard. She saw me and smiled. She thought I was there to grovel. She thought the email had backfired, that the board would rally around her and punish me for going public. She was wrong. The room filled up, standing room only. People I had never seen at a meeting were lining the walls. The board president called the meeting to order and immediately asked Diane to explain the vendor payments. She tried to deflect. She said the budget review was not on the agenda. She said homeowners were not allowed to make accusations without proof. The president cut her off. We have the proof. It was emailed to all of us this morning. Diane's smile vanished. She tried to recover. She said the payments were approved. She said the board had full visibility. The treasurer, a quiet man who had never said much, stood up. I never approved these. I asked for a vote 6 months ago and you told me it was not necessary. The room erupted. People started shouting questions. How much did she take? How long has this been going on? Who else knew? Diane held up her phone trying to record the chaos, but someone in the back yelled for her to put it down. Your camera does not matter, someone else shouted, throwing her own line back at her. The room laughed. That was the funny karma beat, the moment her smug smile vanished when the room turned on her. I stayed quiet. I did not need to say anything. The numbers spoke for themselves. The president called for a recess. Diane walked out, and I could hear her on the phone in the hallway, calling someone, maybe her attorney, maybe one of the vendors. When the meeting resumed, the board announced they were suspending Diane's vendor coordination authority pending an independent audit. They also announced they were rescinding the stop work notice on my fence project and waiving the bogus fees. The room applauded. Diane stood up and screamed, "I will make an example out of you so everyone learns." She was talking to me, but she was looking at the whole room. The president told her to sit down. She refused. She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 2 days later, I was at a hardware store parking lot, loading fence panels into my truck, when Diane pulled up beside me. She got out of her car with her phone already recording, trying to film me buying materials and strangers stare. She started yelling about permit violations, about unapproved materials, about how I was breaking every rule in the book. People in the parking lot stopped and watched. A store employee came out to ask if everything was okay. I did not engage. I kept loading the panels. Diane got louder. She stepped in front of my truck, blocking my path. I told her to move. She refused. She said she was documenting evidence of my non-compliance. The store employee called the police. The police arrived and asked what was going on. Diane tried to explain that I was violating HOA rules by purchasing materials without board approval. The officer looked confused. "Ma'am, this is a public parking lot. He can buy whatever he wants." Diane insisted it was HOA business. The officer told her she needed to leave or she would be cited for disorderly conduct. She left, but not before she shouted that she would see me at the next hearing. I finished loading the truck and drove home. That was my first set piece, the hardware store parking lot confrontation, where Karen tries to film me buying materials and strangers stare. The fence project moved forward. I hired a contractor, a guy who had worked in the neighborhood before and had his own stories about Diane. He told me she had tried to get him banned from the community after he refused to inflate an invoice so she could skim the difference. He was happy to help, and he brought 2 crew members who were equally fed up. We started digging post holes, setting the string line, marking the measurements. Everything was going smooth until Diane showed up again. This time she had a tape measure and she was ready for a fight. That was my second set piece, the tape measure ambush where Karen measures the fence height before it is even set and screams about inches. She marched into my side yard without asking, pulled out a tape measure, and started measuring the string line we had set for the fence alignment. She was measuring height before we had even set the posts, screaming about inches, claiming the fence was going to be too tall. The contractor tried to explain that the posts were not set yet, that the measurements were preliminary, that we were following the approved site plan. Diane did not care. She snapped the tape measure open with a loud crack, held it up to the string line, and announced that we were already 3 inches over the limit. The contractor looked at me. I looked at the tape measure. She was measuring from the low side of the slope, not the grade level specified in the site plan. I told her she was measuring wrong. She told me I was a liar. The contractor stepped in and showed her the site plan, the grade elevation, the exact specification from the surveyor. Diane ripped the paper out of his hands and threw it on the ground. I do not care what your surveyor says. I care what I measure. The contractor picked up the paper, folded it carefully, and told her she needed to leave the property. Diane refused. She said she had a right to inspect any work in progress. The contractor told her that was not true, and if she did not leave, he would stop work and file a complaint with the board. Diane smiled. Good. Stop work. That is what I want. I realized then that she was not trying to enforce rules. She was trying to provoke me into doing something she could use against me. She wanted me to yell, to shove her, to give her a reason to call the police and claim I was dangerous. I stayed calm. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Diane noticed and held up her own phone. We stood there, 2 people in a muddy yard, filming each other, while the contractor and his crew watched in disbelief. Finally, Diane lowered her phone. She told me this was not over. She told me the board would hear about this. She told me I would regret ever moving into this neighborhood. Then she left. The contractor resumed work. We set the posts, poured the concrete, let it cure. Every step was documented. Every measurement was photographed. I kept the clipboard with color-coded sticky notes updated, logs of every interaction, every threat, every attempt to derail the project. The fence went up over the next week. It was exactly to spec, exactly where the surveyor had marked, exactly within the guidelines that were actually in the covenants. Diane sent 3 more violation notices during that week. The board ignored all of them. The treasurer had started asking questions, and other homeowners had started filing complaints about Diane's behavior. The momentum was shifting. If you are enjoying this story, hit the like button and subscribe for more wild HOA drama where karma comes back around. Then the twist hit. I got an email late one night from a homeowner I did not know. She was forwarded a message chain between Diane and the HOA attorney. The attorney had warned the board on email that Karen is creating liability, and Karen kept going anyway. The attorney had told the board that Diane's actions were exposing the HOA to a lawsuit, that her vendor favoritism was a breach of fiduciary duty, and that her harassment of homeowners was creating a hostile environment. The board had received this warning 3 months ago and had done nothing. The homeowner who forwarded the email was on the Architectural Review Committee, and she was furious. She told me she was bringing the email to the next board meeting and demanding Diane's resignation. I thanked her and added the email to my evidence file. Now I had meeting minutes, vendor payment records, quorum logs, and an attorney warning that the board had ignored. I had everything I needed for a lawsuit, but I did not want to go to court. I wanted the board to fix it themselves. I wanted them to own the consequences. The next board meeting was scheduled for the following week, and I was ready. I had my trump card and I was going to deploy it at the right moment. The morning of the meeting, Diane showed up at my fence line one last time. This was the final showdown, the decisive confrontation at my side yard along the fence line with a string line pulled tight. She was holding her clipboard, her phone, and a new violation notice. She told me the fence was still under review, that the board had not officially approved it, that I needed to stop referring to it as complete. I told her the fence was done, the project was closed, and she had no authority to issue any more notices. She stepped closer. I will make an example out of you so everyone learns. That was the 3rd time she said it. And it was the last. I pulled out my phone and played the audio clip. It was from a voicemail she had left me 2 weeks earlier, late at night, after the first board meeting. In the voicemail, she admitted it was personal and she wanted to make an example of me. She said I had embarrassed her in front of the board, and she was going to make sure I regretted it. She said she did not care what the rules were. She was going to find a way to find me, delay me, and make my life miserable until I either moved or gave up. It was a full minute of unfiltered rage, and it was all on tape. I let it play. Diane's face went white. She tried to grab my phone. I stepped back. She demanded I delete it. I told her it was already backed up and already sent to the board. She left without another word. That night, the board meeting was packed again. The homeowner who had forwarded the attorney email brought printed copies for everyone. The treasurer presented the vendor audit results. The numbers were worse than I had thought. Diane had approved over $40,000 in unapproved payments over 18 months. The board adopted an enforcement checklist that limited Karen tactics, requiring board vote for any fine over $50, any vendor contract over $5,000, and any ban from amenities. Then the board president asked Diane to respond. She tried to defend herself. She said the payments were necessary. She said the vendors were the best in the area. She said homeowners like me were trying to undermine the community. The homeowner who had sent the attorney email stood up and read it aloud. The room went silent. When she finished, she called for a vote of no confidence. The motion was seconded immediately. The vote was unanimous. Diane was outvoted so hard the room laughed. She stood there for a moment, staring at the board, at the homeowners, at me. Then she gathered her clipboard and her phone and walked out. 2 other board members resigned that night, saying they did not want to be associated with the fallout. The remaining board members scheduled a special meeting for the following week to elect interim replacements and begin the recall process for a full board election. The special meeting turned into a larger reckoning. More homeowners came forward with stories of harassment, bogus fines, and vendor threats. The management company terminated their contract with the HOA, citing the liability and the hostile work environment. A new management company was hired within 2 weeks, and they immediately began reviewing every fine and fee issued in the past 2 years. Over 30 homeowners received refunds. The vendor contracts were put out for competitive bid, and new companies were brought in. The neighborhood started to feel different. People were talking to each other again. People were showing up to meetings. People were holding the board accountable. My fence was never challenged again. The project was closed, the final inspection passed, and I got a letter from the new board president apologizing for the delays and the harassment. Diane moved out of the neighborhood 6 months later. I heard she tried to join another HOA board in a different community, but the background check flagged her termination, and she was denied. The new board implemented a transparency policy, posting all meeting minutes, budgets, and vendor contracts online within 48 hours of approval. They also adopted a homeowner bill of rights that limited fines, required due process for violations, and banned retaliation. I kept the clipboard with color-coded sticky notes. I kept the audio recording. I kept every email, every photo, every receipt. I did not need them anymore, but I wanted to remember. I wanted to remember that standing up to a bully does not require a fight. It just requires patience, documentation, and the willingness to let them dig their own hole. Diane dug hers with a tape measure and a clipboard, and the board handed her the shovel. I just held the evidence and waited for the right moment to show it. The fence still stands, exactly where it was supposed to be, and every time I look at it, I remember the day she screamed about inches and lost everything. Thank you, and I will catch you in the next one.